Good morning and good afternoon for those of you joining us today, depending on where you are. Thank you so much for joining us. We have some exciting news to share, and we're looking forward to getting started here. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. My name is Carlin Fernandez. I am the inside sales representative for our North American region. I have the pleasure of supporting both Chris Dennis and Jason Eisenberg, our East Coast and Central Territory Director. I apologize if you know them personally. Just kidding. They're awesome. They're a pleasure to support. And if you have any questions during this call, please feel free. We do have a Q&A box that you'll see. All of the questions will be submitted anonymously. Our team will review them, and then based on those questions that are submitted, if they can benefit the rest of the group, we'll absolutely publish them as well as those answers. If at any point you need to take a break during this call, you have a call coming in and you need to take a pause, you are able to pause the meeting with the controls below you. And with that being said, we will go ahead and get started. And I will pass it over to Jay.
Thank you very much, Carlin. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Jay Taylor. I'm the Senior Director of Technical Marketing here at ScreenBeam, and today we're going to be talking about how, the transition back into the office and how do we ensure safer, smarter working and meeting spaces. So with that, let me go ahead and jump right into the presentation. And so as we return to the workplace, there's things we have learned during this pandemic. And there's things that we know about human nature that, going into the workspace that, we know that there's just things that are going to happen, right? You can't change human nature. We know that, for example, meeting spaces are going to be used. Whether employees restrict access to those rooms or not, the employees are going to find a way to meet. They're going to want to meet face to face, and you can't really stop it, nor do you really want to. And so, there's things we've learned about this through this pandemic that meeting spaces are critical for collaboration and innovation. There was a couple different news articles from the Stanford News and Forbes that looked into this, and they came to the conclusion as part of their research and working with customers that face-to-face meetings are essential. They're essential for developing new ideas and keeping the staff motivated and focused. That the organizations have developed a new appreciation for the importance of that face-to-face interaction, that importance of that office, and the critical nature of engagement. Now, the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, was recently asked in a New York Times article, that Microsoft has been really successful during the pandemic, with ensuring collaboration and communication is taking place. And so they had asked him, are you going to switch to this new model of the remote office? And his answer was no. They fully expect to get back into the office, and that replacing an office scenario with an all remote setup would just be replacing one dogma with another, and that there's only so much you can do virtually, that you can't replicate the nature of face-to-face interaction. And some of the things that he misses, for example, is, that moment before the meeting and after the meeting where you're able to individually connect with folks in the meeting and talk to them and stuff. And you can't do that virtually. There's a whole set of soft skills that are crucial to managing and mentoring your employees that can't be done virtually. I mean, when we take a look at our own interactions here at ScreenBeam, there's a lot of things we're able to do, through Teams and Zoom and all that kind of thing. But that's because we have pre-existing relationships and that allow us to continue to be successful. But when you start to move that to an all virtual setup, that, there's just things you can't be successful at always doing. And so we know that, the office is going to restart. We know that meeting spaces are going to be essential, to that innovation and collaboration. And so therefore making changes to that office space, those meeting spaces, is going to be critical to ensure employee safety. And so that means that, office spaces, companies are going to have to ensure social distancing in common work areas. They're going to need to be minimizing the number of contact and touch points in the meeting spaces. and implement contactless technologies. We know that, there's going to be ways to convert non-traditional meeting spaces into safe meeting spaces, and leveraging things like digital signage for communication and education of company policy and driving, those concepts home. When we take a look at the office space, the meeting space pre-pandemic, there was a lot of contact. There was a lot of things going on. There was a lot of people packed into, confined spaces that had a lot of common touch points. We were touching, rings of adapters. We were touching dongles. There was just so much going on. And I know there's been proposals from a number of from like CDC and from government officials about removing 50% of the chairs to help provide more space for social distancing in those meeting space. That's great, but what does that do about touch points? It doesn't address the touch points. And that's where implementing the right wireless display technology helps reduce the need to touch those dongles, to touch the cables and switches and adapters and all of those things, right? And because users are able to connect wirelessly to the display, they don't need to cluster around the display cable, that ring of adapters. So it's going to be really important to start looking at and addressing these sorts of things. When we start looking at, use of the space in the office, stand-up meetings, those were already, a growing phenomena in the workspace. Because without chairs, people are more concise in their communication, which leads to shorter meetings. Shorter meetings drive more focus on updates and avoid lengthy, debate and discussion, over, specific topics. And so they already bring a lot of benefits to the workspace. But in the context of returning to work after this pandemic, they really start to foster the idea of social distancing, right? They make it easier to facilitate collaboration while still giving people the space to spread out and to ensure that we're following social distancing guidelines, right? And with the meetings being shorter and more focused, that means less face-to-face exposure. And so, it becomes an opportunity to really create these stand-up meeting spaces, because the only thing you need is an open space, a display on the wall, and wireless display, and you've got a non-traditional meeting space converted into a stand-up meeting space, that quickly, that easily. And so it becomes another valuable tool in assuring, safer meeting spaces by leveraging these open spaces. The third thing that really starts to come into play here is digital signage. And so digital signage is an exciting new way to leverage the technology, because it allows you to leverage all the displays you've got dispersed around the office, right? The ones in the conference rooms, the ones in the hallways, the ones in the stand-up meeting spaces. It becomes an effective way to drive critical communication out to your employees, right? Without requiring everybody to gather in tight confined spaces and things like that, especially when you start talking about the meeting spaces and the conference rooms, because digital signage can be used to drive awareness of social distancing guidelines. And if you can do that right as people are walking into that confined space, and you can remind people, hey, here's the company policy, here's the best practices, make sure you're wearing your mask, make sure you're sitting, far enough apart, make sure you're not clustering around the display. It becomes a powerful way to drive those points home right before the start of every meeting. And so you really have a lot of tools available to you. And in the pre-pandemic days, right, there was already a trend to simplify the conference room, right, to improve efficiency and productivity through in these modern meeting spaces by eliminating additional hardware. But now more than ever, there's not just a productivity need, there is a health and safety need to do this. And so companies need these solutions now that are easy to implement and easy to deploy and easy to manage. They need these solutions right away that address the health and safety requirements as employees are starting to return back into work. And so that's where, we're looking at ScreenBeam is a solution towards this. It's a critical piece of the technology really to help lower the risk, because you can eliminate or reduce the amount of contact of dongles and cables and switches and adapters and remote controls and all those things, because the only device they touch is their own. It can help you turn non-traditional meeting spaces into stand-up meeting spaces, right? Because, like I said, the only thing you need is an open space and a display on the wall and a ScreenBeam device, and you can turn that into a stand-up meeting space, right? And help ensure that social distancing is taking place. And with the digital signage support within our devices, you can drive those company policies and guidelines and all of those sorts of things. You can leverage those common displays to help distribute that critical information. So it really becomes this critical piece of technology to help you lower your overall risk in your conference rooms and meeting spaces. And so that's where we're really excited to announce the launch of our ScreenBeam 1100 Plus. You may have seen this in a lot of the national and international pubs, commercial integrators, SCN, ABM Network, and all of that kind of stuff. We're just launching it here today, and we're sharing the excitement of this new product and how it can help you drive this new methodology or mode of engagement, with safer meeting spaces. So with that, let me start, share a little bit about the 1100 Plus. This is our, most advanced wireless display receiver, with cross-platform support that we've ever designed and built and manufactured. You get full cross-platform support with Windows, Mac OS, iOS, and Android, which means there's no dongles to touch and manage. There's no third-party apps to install on devices. There's no in-room PCs required. This is designed for enterprise deployment, and I'll go into some of that in just a minute of some of the things we specifically have done with this platform to ensure this is designed to meet your needs. It is contactless technology, so it does do all of those things we just talked about. It does have an HDMI input, which to support legacy devices, which reduces dependency on HDMI switches and eliminates hardware, to lower your installation and deployment costs. So it's already addressing some of the trends that were going on prior to the pandemic, and now it's addressing some of the needs that come with this returning into the office space as well. It does have dual Wi-Fi radios in there with a 3x3 MIMO antenna array. It's got a number of critical technologies to ensure secure, stable operation in even the most dense RF environments. It is remotely manageable through our CMS Enterprise tool, which I'll talk about briefly as well in this presentation. And then it's got a number of collaborative technologies for ghost inking and things like that to enable a much smoother and natural collaboration experience. So we're really excited about this product. Now, as we started to talk about with our customers about what were their pain points and what were the challenges they've had with trying to support and deploy wireless display, and the top of the list was a single box solution for all the platforms. Right, they needed something that was easy for employees and guests to use. They needed something that worked in the really dense RF environments of a corporate setting. They needed adaptability to meet their specific needs. They didn't want to adapt their networks to go support the wireless display technology. They needed the wireless display technology to adapt to their network requirements. And so there's all these things that they had around performance and uptime and things. So we spent a lot of time addressing, designing and developing technology to address these specific needs. So, for example, cross-platform support. Customers use the native wireless display protocol on their device. So if you've got a Windows device, you're using what's built into Windows. If you have a Mac or iOS, you're using what's built into the Mac and iOS. If you're using Android, you're using what's built in there. There's literally no apps required at all. There's no dongles to plug into this thing that might get lost, that might walk out of the room. There's no in-room PC required to maintain and manage and all that kind of stuff and updates, and you have to worry about stuff breaking. Things like the HDMI input to address, the legacy devices, stuff like, the lower profile to make it easier to install and address some of the ADA compliance stuff, the multi-network capabilities to address the adaptability to their network environment, not forcing their network environment to adapt to us. So there's lots of different things, the AGO Miracast support that we build in that allows you to work in even the craziest and most dense RF environments and get a nice stable wireless display signal going on. the digital signage. So there's lots of things that we built into our device to make this truly an enterprise class wireless display solution. So, as I said, connecting is simple with no apps, no dongles or anything like that. What's really nice about it is the process. If you look at the connection process between these devices or between these different platforms, it's really the same process. In Windows, there's a connect button that I hit. It does a discovery, it finds the receiver, and if I've got pin pairing turned on, it asks for the pin code. If I'm on an Apple or Mac OS, I hit the AirPlay button that does a discovery, it finds a ScreenBeam receiver. If I've got pin pairing turned on, it asks for the pin code. If I'm on an Android device, there's a cast button of some sort. Samsung calls it, I think, SmartView. Others call it All Share or Sharecast or something like that. But it's all the same thing. It's a button that says, hey, go out, find the ScreenBeam receiver. If there's a pin code, turn it on. Now, this is great because one is as a user, I don't have to learn how to learn some specific application or load some specific application on my device in order to display. I use whatever's built into my device. So from my perspective as a user, it becomes very easy. From the IT administrator's perspective, it's really nice because guess what? I don't have to train somebody on how to use this. I don't have to ask my guests to come in and download an application. I don't have to open up security holes by plugging in dongles and things like that. So it's a really elegant way to solve that sort of challenge. Another thing that we did is with our devices, we implemented something called MultiView mode. And this is a really powerful collaboration tool because it allows up to 4 separate devices to be connected to the ScreenBeam at the same time. And there's elegant animation that allows the screen to start splitting depending on how many users are connected. And so, sorry, I went the wrong direction. So basically what happens is if I'm presenting, I get access to the full screen. But if another presenter wants to come in and we want to compare notes and stuff, they can connect at the same time and the screen will split into 2. And then if a third person comes in, because we want to compare notes across 3 people, it does that, it splits again. And then, up to 4 separate presenters, so I get quadrant, each screen gets a quadrant of the display. And so, it becomes a really elegant way for us to be able to collaborate and share and really be productive in our meeting spaces. Now, another thing that we've done is with the ScreenBeam 1100 Plus is we've added an HDMI input. And this becomes really, really nice because now what happens is ScreenBeam becomes essentially a functional switcher in the conference room. That means I don't need a separate switcher in the room because I can now switch between wired and wireless sources. Now, what you see here is I've got the title of this is HDMI input in single view mode. And that's because we actually support 2 different modes of operation. There's a single view mode and then there's a quick switch mode. And so I'm going to show you how the HDMI input behaves depending on these different modes. And so the first thing you'll see is in single input mode, the wired input always takes precedence. So if I'm presenting with a wired input and a wireless device tries to come in and share the screen like I did in MultiView mode, we're going to reject that content. We're going to reject that connection request. And instead, the wired will always take precedence. So in this particular case, the wired guy always gets the screen, but then we have this thing that we call quick switch mode. And the way quick switch mode allows me, whether I'm doing a wired or wireless source, it will automatically switch between to the newest input. So if I've got a wireless connection presenting and then another presenter wants to come in and take over the screen, they can connect and then it will automatically disconnect me and then the new presenter will take over. Right, so this is an unmoderated experience between 2 wireless sources. Well, we can also do that with the wired source with this new wired input because I can have a wired connection going on. If a wireless connection comes in, it will then take over the screen and start presenting the wireless content. If I have a wireless session presenting and a wired source plugs in, the wired source takes over. And so now I'm functionally switching between both wireless and wired sources with this new input and quick switch mode. So now let's talk about this. What the ScreenBeam looks like in a truly deployed network. So this really starts to show the adaptability and the scalability of ScreenBeam to adapt to the network and not forcing the network to adapt to us, right? So what I've got up here is I've got a typical sort of enterprise deployment going on where I have an internal company VLAN and I've got an external guest network. So here's my internal network, here's my external network, I've got a firewall separating them. So how does ScreenBeam work in this environment? So I've got my ScreenBeam device, I've got my in-room display, I connect to my display via HDMI. Now, in this mode, I can operate completely isolated from both networks. So I don't need any network connection in order to connect and display to ScreenBeam. Neither for employees or guests, I can allow everybody to connect and present. But you'll see I've got 3 network interfaces on here. I've got Wi-Fi 1, Wi-Fi 2, and I've got Ethernet. I'm going to connect up the Ethernet to the internal guest network. Now this, I don't have to do this, but this brings a number of advantages. For example, I can now remotely manage this device, but it also does more than that. So now that I'm connected up to the network, let's talk about how different classes of citizens, my employees and my guests, are able to connect to the ScreenBeam device. So first off, what you're going to see is employees with P2P devices, they're going to be able to connect, and the content flows directly from their device to the ScreenBeam to the display. No content flows over any network at all. Okay, now that's because I've got employees with P2P devices. This means my Windows 10 and my Android guys. Now, what about my Mac OS, my employees running Mac OS or iOS devices? How do they get connected? Well, when they walk into the building, their device is going to automatically connect to the internal company network, right? And so in that particular case, if they launch AirPlay, they will see the ScreenBeam device as a display endpoint that they can connect and display to. In that particular model, the content flows over the internal network to the ScreenBeam device to the display. Now, these are employees. They're allowed to connect to the internal network. I don't have a problem. My network has plenty of bandwidth to be able to handle that. But I'm certainly, what about my guests? I'm not going to give them access to my internal network, right? So how do I address those? Well, that's where ScreenBeam has this mode that we call local Wi-Fi or local AP mode. In that particular case, they can use their Wi-Fi tools, connect to ScreenBeam as a little ad hoc network, and content. Then they can launch their AirPlay, they can launch their Windows connection, they can launch their Android device, and it will connect to the ScreenBeam, and content will flow directly to ScreenBeam, just like in the P2P model, but it's creating a little infrastructure network connection and flowing the content that way, right? Again, I've never compromised my internal network. Now, in this particular mode, they don't have internet access. So how do I address the internet access? Well, that's where this second Wi-Fi radio comes into play, because what I can do here is I can actually bridge this back to the guest network. And by doing so, I've just given them internet access. So now they can go out to their own company firewalls, their own internal networks, pull their content down and share it over the ScreenBeam device without ever compromising my internal guest network. Now, let's say for whatever reason, I don't want to enable this, because it's up to me as the IT administrator of whether I want to turn this on or not, right? I can still allow these folks to connect to ScreenBeam via the guest network, right? So I can disable this local AP mode and instead have them connect to the guest network. And in that particular case, just like the employees, it's going to go over the guest network infrastructure to the ScreenBeam to the display. And again, using their native applications. There's no applications to install, no dongles or anything like that. And I've never jeopardized my company network. It's completely secure, right? All my pin pairing is still there. So if I've got all that turned on, I can enable all of that. Now, as I talk about security, as I said, that everything's completely secure. This is really, really nice. And so what this allows me to do is what we say is we've got 3 levels of security, right? The first is I've got my connection level security. I've got my WPA2, my 802.1x, certificates and authentication going on for the connection level. I've also got session level encryption going on. So I've got AES 128 encryption, and then I've got my on-screen pin pairing. But you'll see right here, what I've also got is going on is I've got, this thing completely air gapped, completely isolated in here. And so what this means is there's no way, there's no physical traces on the board, there's no routing going on. I can't get from the P2P session, for example, to my internal employee network. I can't do it. There's no routing tables inside here. There's no physical traces on the board that would ever allow me to make that connection, right? Likewise, I can't get from the WLAN, the guest connection to the employee network, right? There's no routing context for that. I can't get from the guest network to the employee network. There's no physical traces that allow that to happen. So this device is completely isolated. So I can isolate this completely from any network. I can connect it to a network. I have a lot of flexibility in how I can adapt this to my specific network and security requirements. This is the only device on the market that can actually do these sorts of things. As I said, our device is remotely manageable, so we have our new CMS Enterprise tool as well. And so what that allows me to do is it allows me to remotely manage this device. So whether I'm a global administrator and I've got a multinational corporation that I'm working for, let's say I've got offices in Singapore, in Japan, in Europe, in the US. Well, I've got the ability to manage all of those devices, but more than that, I actually have role-based authentication going on, where if I want to enable in my IT department in New York to manage only the devices that in their campus, I can create that sort of role-based authentication and give them access to just their devices. Yet I, as a super admin or global admin, I can see all of my buildings, all my devices that are deployed. And so I have the flexibility to be able to do all of that. I can do device configuration. I've got a dashboard that gives me a lot of critical information at my fingertips. I can schedule tasks. Got custom background images. I can set up my digital signage and all of that sort of thing through our CMS Enterprise tool. And so this becomes a really powerful tool for multinational corporations with multiple campuses where they've got to manage devices deployed across their environment. So I'm just about done with this presentation, and we'll be opening up to questions in just a minute. But how do we fare against our competition? So what we're showing you here is, I don't expect everybody to read this. This is a bit of an eye chart, but let me just kind of give you a synopsis of what's going on here. First off, we think we're crushing the competition for a number of reasons, right? First, if we take a look at the price points, right, we're still at a sub 1,000 price point with this device, right? Everybody else is $1,400 and higher, and that's your price of entry, right? When you start actually factoring in all their subscription stuff and their payment things that they require, you're well beyond all of that, right? For the next thing is, you'll see is that, some people can do some things, others can do other things, but nobody does it all except for ScreenBeam, right? We've got, native applications support across all the platforms, right? Some people support some of it, but others don't support everything, right? We've got the true isolated multi-network, right? So I can adapt this thing to my specific network requirements. We're the only ones that can do that. There's others out there that can do a little bit of VLAN tagging, but that's not really true multi-network and doesn't have the same level of security capabilities and stuff that we support with this multi-network environment. If we take a look at the centralized management sort of thing, it's included with every single ScreenBeam that we 1100 plus that we sell. So there is no, you don't have to pay for the central management tool, right? Where if you look at the others, you've got subscription models for firmware updates and all of these sorts of things going on. They're going to continue charging you. That's just the reality of it all, right? If we take a look at the number of presenters on screen, we've got true four-way presenters. The only other person that can do that is one of our competitors. Nobody else does all of that. If we take a look at the HDMI input with 4K support, some people can do some of that, but not everybody. So we really do think that we are absolutely crushing the competition when you factor in the fact that we can do all of the native inking and annotation and collaboration. Again, that's unique to us. Nobody else can do that. So there's lots of things that we're bringing to the table, And, we really feel like, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button there. We really feel like the ScreenBeam Plus is a critical piece of the solution for lowering the risk in your meeting spaces, because we do enable the contactless meeting space. We do, help convert non-traditional meeting spaces into those safe stand-up meeting spaces. We do have the digital signage support to drive that essential communication. And it truly is a one box for all, with no apps, no dongles, no in-room PC, the multi-network capability. We really do think we have, significantly more features, more performance, more value than anything else out there on the market. And so, with that, let me kind of wrap up the presentation and say, don't forget to join us at Infocomm Connected on June 16th through the 18th. This is an online event. It's free. You can register for this. There's no charge to participate in this. And you can find out some of the new and exciting things that we're going to be sharing at Infocomm as well. On the right-hand side, you'll see your contact information. So if you're here in the U.S., we've got our U.S. territory directors. They're on this call as well. We've got Jason Eisenberg for the East, Chris Dennis for Central. We've got Darren Rank for the West. Carlin is our lovely host and moderator for this event on this call as well. She's our inside sales manager for all the enterprise stuff. We've got Latin America support. Benny is on this call. We've got David Sharbit for Europe on this call. Unfortunately, Johnny couldn't make it. This is like 2 a.m. his time, so he wasn't able to attend this call. I didn't want to ask him to join, but we do thank you for joining this participation. I'm going to hand it back to Carlin now for the Q&A portion. So Carlin, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I hope everyone found this webinar useful and you learned a bit about ScreenBeam and how we can make the conference room a safe place. I'm choosing to keep up our contact information, so that way if anyone has any questions, I'm really hoping to get some emails and phone calls from all of you with any questions or any projects. We can get you a demo unit, whatever you need. And one thing I always like to say, if you personally don't have a relationship with one of our territory directors, I do, as I mentioned previously, have the pleasure of supporting all of them. So please, when in doubt, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I am always happy to help. Thank you for joining us today. Taking a look at a couple questions here.
So Carlin, I'll jump in here, and Parker, I think in the chat we were suggesting that you maybe take this one. The question is, how is this different from having a Chromecast plugged into an HDMI port on your conference room TV and casting your screen onto the TV? I can see other options like multi-presenter and other features being helpful, but the basic idea still seems to be similar to basic Chromecast. Do you want to take that one, Parker?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. So this is a great question. There are a lot of things that set the ScreenBeam 1100 Plus apart from a solution like a Chromecast. So first of all, we're talking about a product that is designed for an enterprise customer versus a product that's designed for a consumer or retail customer. So the hardware in the 1100 Plus is of substantially higher grade. You're looking at wireless radios much closer to what you would find in a commercial access point than your Chromecast dongle, which the dongle itself is smaller than just one of the radios that we have inside the ScreenBeam. But there's a lot of other features as well. So the native support for Miracast in Windows, for AirPlay on Apple devices, for wireless syncing and touch on your Windows devices, for remote management with our CMS Enterprise tool. All of those are things that you're going to get with a product like the 1100 Plus that you wouldn't be finding with a Chromebook. We've also put a lot of time and effort into making sure that we're able to help organizations as they look at deployment and enterprise scale device management. So we have the ability to select the wireless channel and transmit power for the wireless radios on the ScreenBeam so that you can make sure that these devices aren't interfering with one another or with other devices like the access points on your infrastructure network. So there are a lot of features, and I'm sure we could have a whole call just to talk about those, but we'll open it up to some other questions as well. So we had a customer who was asking about the max range of the ScreenBeam. I think that's come up a couple of times now. So in a typical environment, we expect the wireless radio range on the ScreenBeam to be on the order of 30 feet or 10 meters. If you were to install the ScreenBeam in an open location where you had good line of sight between your client device and the ScreenBeam receiver, then you could extend that easily to 100 feet and beyond. I know a couple of customers that I work with are in the education space, and they have ScreenBeams in an auditorium setting. And so they'll have the ScreenBeam at the back of the auditorium in their tech booth, and they'll have teachers or presenters up on the stage in the front of the auditorium, and they're able to get connected for wireless display.
So we had a question also come in that says, we have the 960 model in our rooms and simply love them. Is there a feature of the 1100 Plus that screams upgrade? Mike, you want to take that one?
Sure, absolutely. So in the 1100 Plus, you know, one of the big things is obviously having multi-network. So as you start to bring in app-free connectivity with iOS, macOS, and Chrome devices, you have that challenge of how do I enable both employees and guests to connect in the same room? And in other situations, you've had to make a choice between what network you actually deploy it on. And with the ScreenBeam 1100 and the 1100 Plus now, which is the upgrade to the 1100, it is a true multi-network. So that's one of the very key important core features of it. But also, with the 1100 Plus, you get MultiView, you get the quick switch, you get the enterprise version of the CMS, which is included with these products. We do not charge an annual fee, a maintenance fee, a subscription, any licensing. It just simply comes with it. And now you also have the big, huge benefit of having HDMI input and then the switching control automatically inside the device, so that if you do need to leave cables out for whatever reason, as a backup or just to ensure that you have a way of getting cable connectivity to the front of the room, you can do that through the ScreenBeam, and it eliminates the need for users to have to switch inputs. And that's really just scratching the surface on what's different between the 960 and the 1100 Plus.
I know we had one question come in asking about the frame rate for motion video and the latency with ScreenBeam. So we do support up to 4K 30 Hertz, depending on your input source device. So 4K 30 Hertz is the top spec within Miracast from the Wi-Fi Alliance. So depending on what type of device you've got coming in, you'll be able to stream video up to, like I said, that 4K resolution. What we've seen in a broad sense is that the majority of devices, client side, will be able to stream 1080p video at a really good quality for a wireless connection. So when I say that, I'm very critical on the engineering side of what I will say is flawless versus really good. So it's certainly something that in a conference room, meeting room, classroom sort of experience, you're going to have a great streaming quality. Latency is very low. The peer-to-peer Miracast latency can be lower than 150 down into the 80 millisecond range. So you're going to get very quick response. And that really comes into play if you have, a mouse and you're trying to navigate through windows. Having that very low latency time is going to improve the user experience. It helps with that sense of hand-eye connection. So that's something that our engineering team is always working on. How can we shave off another 10 milliseconds here or there?
Yeah, absolutely. And to add to that, the the wireless display system supports HDCP content, so it's protected content, and we're very unique in the wireless presentation space in supporting HDCP. So content that's shared both over a wireless Miracast connection, as well as any content that's connected over the cable. If it's HDCP, again, if it's protected content and it needs that HDCP security to be able to display itself, the ScreenBeam 1100 Plus will support that.
So there was another question that said, what's the difference between the 1100 and 1100 Plus? I'll go ahead and take that one. So basically the 1100 Plus is a follow-on to the 1100. So those of you familiar with the 1100, you get all the same features in the 1100 Plus. But there were some significant upgrades that we also did to the 1100 Plus, like the HDMI input, that allows it to start acting as a functional switcher. In addition to that, we went with a lower profile chassis or case to make it easier to install and support. We went with a darker color as well so that it blends in with the back of the displays. And then we added more memory because there's some significant updates we're going to be doing to the device in this coming year that we'll be sharing more on as we roll forward. We're excited about that. But the beauty of it is that it's still the same core architecture, it's still the same core design, and it's still the same core software stack. That means customers that have already qualified the 1100 and now want to move to the 1100 Plus can actually do that really, really easy, because for them, the only change that they've really got to look at is that HDMI input, and just verify that piece works for them. So transitioning from 1100 to 1100 Plus is going to be super easy for those. But it's definitely going to be worth it because there's, like I said, there's going to be some really, really cool stuff that we're going to be announcing in the near future towards what we're going to be doing with the 1100 Plus as we roll the clock forward.
I see.
Another question here saying, can you display multiple presentations, videos on 4 screens, or only duplicates? And so, Jay, do you want to take that question?
Can you display, so let me make sure I understand that. Can you display multiple presentation videos on 4 screens or only 2? I'm not sure I fully understand that question, but let me see if I can try and give you a little more clarity on the multi-view. So in the multi-view mode, each 4 separate devices, so 4 separate presenters can connect and each display their own content on that display. So I'm not mirroring across 4 separate displays. I'm taking 4 presenters and putting them on the screen at the same time. Does that answer the question, or is there something?
Yeah, I think to be clear, the ScreenBeam itself connects to one physical output. It has one HDMI output on it, and then some customers may connect it up to multiple displays, using a matrix to do so. And so in that case, the physical displays would be duplicates. We're not driving 4 separate displays. What MultiView does, it allows up to 4 different clients, people, devices, to connect up to the display in the front of the room. So you can have either 1 presenter full screen, 2 presenter split screen, 3 presenter, or 4 presenter in a 4-quadrant screen. And one of the things that's really interesting about MultiView and the way that we implemented it is we understood from use studies that eliminating the need for a moderator in a room to control who's presenting and what size one screen is versus another screen is really problematic. And so what we did is we studied this use case and how people actually connect and collaborate in meeting spaces, and we automated the entire process. And so simply, when you have multi-view switched on, which is configurable by the IT administrator to say, yep, we want this feature on. When you connect and project, the first person, you have the full screen. When the second person comes on, it automatically changes the screen layout so that you have two windows side by side. And then the third person, again, it once again automatically manipulates it. And then the fourth person, again, it automatically manipulates it. And then as people drop off, it again kind of reorganizes itself. But the idea is that you really don't want to create a dependency on a single user to be a moderator in a meeting. You want people to be able to come in and collaborate very freely. Things need to feel very natural. And when they want to share, just allow them to use their device's native screen mirroring capabilities, regardless of what it is, to just simply tap and connect.
So Mike, another question came in that says, will you be adding video conferencing in the near future? You want to answer that one?
I would say stay tuned. There was a article in Rave where somebody caught a sneak peek of a technology demonstration we did earlier this year at ISE in Amsterdam. And so I think if you stay tuned to ScreenBeam and you look at come see us at Infocomm Connected, you'll probably find more information. But one of the key things that Jay did share in this announcement live event today was that one of the big issues, one of the big benefits for the 1100 Plus is that we created a larger memory footprint in the device, and that is specifically for future applications, future expandability of the device. Our goal is to help customers enable something very quickly, make it easy for them to enable, make it really easy for the users so that they don't have to be taught. You don't have to do a lot of professional development to make it usable. And then also provide some future proofing down the road, because we know that the way that people work together in meeting spaces continues to change, and the tools that are needed in those meeting spaces also continue to change. And so we're providing a platform that will give you that future expandability to help your business grow and to meet what your particular needs are.
So there was another question, is the standard 1100 EOL getting discontinued or remaining in the lineup for lower priced option to the Plus?
So the 1100 Plus will replace the 1100. We're going to be continuing for the next several months. We'll be making an announcement about the 1100, and then ultimately, eventually, the 1100 Plus will replace the 1100.
And then, will it allow for Zoom? Which I think you just you just sort of answered that question. So I'd say, stay tuned for our Infocomm Connected activities, and we will probably discuss more things like that there.
Yeah, we have a lot of our customers are already integrating ScreenBeam into Zoom rooms, into Teams rooms, into different UC host rooms. And the way that they're doing it today is they're simply putting the ScreenBeam as the input to whatever the room host solution is. And we're looking to provide some more flexibility in that, but we're not ready to provide specific announcements today on this webinar. But the idea is, if you really think about what your environment is like and what the day in the life of a user is, either an employee or a guest coming into your facility and needing to use a room, the number one thing is just getting them connected and making it easy, eliminating the complexities for them. And that's exactly what ScreenBeam 1100 does. And so, 1100 Plus does. And so as you're deploying, regardless of what other technology is in your rooms, you're always going to have the 1100 Plus being that front end. It's going to be that first thing that enables the connections. And so the benefit is that as a user, as an employee, as a guest, anytime I come to your facility and I need to connect, it's always going to be the same across every single room type. Even if you have me standing in a hall doing a stand-up meeting, with a small group of people, I'm always going to connect the same way. There's never a question of, okay, well, wait a second, how do I do it in this room? In this room, I need to use software. In this room, I need to get a dongle. I need to connect something to my USB. In this other room, it's a different way. With ScreenBeam, you just deploy it across everything, and it integrates towards any other technologies that you have in the room. But again, really the trend is moving towards simplicity. It's about eliminating a lot of the complexity in meeting spaces and making it easier. And so you start to think about ScreenBeam 1100 Plus and these features, and you can see that all of these control features, these inputs, the switching, the connectivity, it's all automated for the user. Again, you don't have to have all of that structure in place to to have productive meetings and to enable connectivity. But if you do, and a lot of our customers do, I'd say, a good 50% of the rooms that we do have got a lot of different technologies associated with them. ScreenBeam just plugs right in. And so as a technology, we work well in both the retrofit, which is really important, especially for today, because a lot of customers just simply need to deploy wireless display. It's just desperately needed across organizations. So retrofit is very easy. You can plug it into whatever you already have happening in a room. It just needs the HDMI input, and away you go. Or when you're in new build and you're designing new rooms, of course, ScreenBeam will fit into there as well. If you're somewhere in between, you can retrofit now and carry the technology over. If you're doing, if you're doing room refreshes or room redesigns, and thinking about the technology. So there's really no need to wait to buy ScreenBeam and implement ScreenBeam.
And then there was a question on how we manage audio. Parker, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're capable of outputting audio both from our HDMI output as well as from a 3.5 millimeter auxiliary audio. So if you have an external amplified room audio system, or if you have like an IR blaster for a hearing impaired solution, you're able to cut that audio from the 3.5 millimeter jack and take it out to those external sources, and that'll just be handled automatically by the ScreenBeam. So if you have that 3.5 millimeter plugged in, it'll notice that. If you don't, audio will be sent via HDMI. And on the client side, when I connect to a ScreenBeam, my PC automatically recognizes and changes the audio output to the ScreenBeam so that the sound will come through on the display. And the same is true with an Apple device or
and there was a question,
Android device.
And then there was a question on when it ships. As Jason pointed out, contact your local sales contact, anybody listed on the screen currently. If you're in the US, Latin America, contact Carlin. Any of these folks will be able to help you with that. And we've also got, sample programs and stuff like that where, you can try it out and things like that as well. So do reach out to your sales contact and they'll be able to help you with all of that. And I think we got through most, if not all, of the questions. I'm just kind of looking through now. Can you boost the 30-foot range? Parker, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ScreenBeam itself, by design, is not a line of sight device. You don't have to have your client device, be able to see the receiver. But because of the enterprise grade radio that we do have inside the ScreenBeam, if you were to mount the ScreenBeam on the ceiling or in another way such that it was pretty accessible and you did have that visual line of sight, then for those peer-to-peer devices, propagation losses are going to be very minimal. So you would definitely be able to push that range beyond 100 feet. For infrastructure-based connection, some of the discovery also happens with the infrastructure, and so you would be able to get a little bit of extra range on that end as well. But there's not like an external antenna accessory or anything like that. It's all integrated into the receiver.
And then there was a question on how much, does CMS cost? And as I mentioned during the presentation, CMS is actually included with every ScreenBeam 1100 Plus, so there are no fees for that. You get that when you buy the ScreenBeam.
Yeah. Also, the firmware, the updates for the device, maintenance updates, all that. Those are all included as well. We do not charge a update subscription, on a per unit basis. Or on any basis at all. You just simply purchase the ScreenBeam 1100 Plus and deploy it, and then you will be able to enjoy updates. You'll be able to enjoy the management platform, all that without any recurring costs or fees.
I was going to say, and if I can take just a minute to highlight a couple of key differences or key features in CMS Enterprise, our management platform. So if any of you are familiar with the previous ScreenBeam products, then you know that CMS Enterprise is not our first foray into a device management platform. So we took everything we learned from our original version of CMS, and we incorporated all of the customer feedback that we were hearing as we designed CMS Enterprise. CMS Enterprise is a service-based architecture with a web user interface. This allows you to have multiple administrators and to have privilege levels for your different administrators. So someone could administer all of the receivers that you have. Someone else can administer only devices that are at a certain site. And you can even have a role that we call a monitor, which is a user who's able to see devices and whether they're online, offline, or in use or idle, but they aren't able to do any administrative functions. You can select multiple devices and push firmware updates and settings changes and policy changes. So all of the key features and abilities that you're going to want from a remote management tool are going to be there and included. And you've got that bonus usability from the web user interface and the multi-user support.
Yeah, this makes the tool very effective, not just for IT deployment and regular maintenance, but also for support. If you have a help desk and you want to be able to give a help desk agent the access to CMS to be able to see what's happening in the room. If somebody calls in and says, hey, I'm having a hard time connecting, there's an access level in CMS that would allow somebody like a help desk person to be able to get the kind of information they need and to be able to remotely support a user in that room versus having to send somebody out physically into those rooms to assist a user.
All right, with that being said, thank you everyone so much for joining us today. We're going to stay online for another 15 minutes. So if anyone has any last minute questions that they'd like to get in, please feel free to use the Q&A box and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. And if for some reason you need to contact us after the fact, as I mentioned earlier, I included my direct contact information in the chat. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help. And if I can't help you, I'll definitely point you in the right direction. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope you all are staying healthy and safe.